Hi everyone, welcome back to Black Cat Crimes, or if you're new here, welcome. I'm so excited to have you all here with me today. I'm Victoria, and today we're going to be jumping right into the case of Andrew Caballeiro. Now, this case, as I'm sure you can see, is shorter than my others that I've covered so far, but I really don't think it's gotten a lot of coverage. I have not seen any other YouTubers covering it, and though it got a lot of coverage in Florida at the time, I really don't know that it got much national attention. And that's because it did take place so quickly and there's so little information about it. But given that Andrew was only a 7-day-old baby, it is so important to talk about even now when we think we know what happened, but we don't really have all the answers. On January 28, 2020, police would receive a call from a family telling them that they couldn't reach their loved ones in another home. They asked them to do a welfare check, and when police arrived at the 21,900 block of 187th Street in Miami, Florida, no one answered the door at the home. After they entered the home, they made an absolutely gruesome discovery. Within, they found the bodies of 40-year-old Arlety Garcia Valdes, 60-year-old Isabel Valdes Gonzalez, and 84-year-old Lina Gonzalez Licor. The equally horrifying realization would be that Arlety's 7-day-old son, Andrew Caballeiro, was missing from the home. He should have been there, yet he was nowhere to be found. As police began to examine the bodies, they quickly realized that the 3 women had been killed with a high-powered rifle. And naturally, with a triple homicide and a baby missing, a literal infant who couldn't take care of himself in any capacity, police immediately sprang into action. And within hours, they had a suspect, Ernesto Caballeiro, who was Arlety's husband and Andrew's father. He had been seen on surveillance footage outside the home, entering while carrying a high-powered rifle that would be the weapon that killed these 3 women. Later, on that same footage, 49-year-old Ernesto would be seen carrying Andrew and the high-powered rifle out of the home. An Amber Alert was immediately issued for baby Andrew, with Ernesto listed as the abductor. Police began scouring South Florida looking for any sign of the baby or his father. They shared he would be driving a large white, slightly beat-up 2001 Chevrolet Express van with distinctive bumper stickers, including one that read, "Feel the Burn." Not only had investigators sent out this Amber Alert, but pictures of Ernesto and baby Andrew in the car Ernesto would be driving were on every electronic billboard in the area, and very quickly, roads around South Florida were being shut down. I think the saddest part about seeing the Amber Alert and the electronic billboards and even news coverage of this time is that Andrew was so little and so young, only 7 days old at this time, that they had to use his baby picture taken in the hospital, still wrapped up in the hospital issue blanket and a hospital issued hat that they put on newborns, as his missing persons photo. There have been a few other photos of him shared since then, but that first photo was the one taken in the hospital directly after his birth. And that is just absolutely heartbreaking to think about. Ernesto was described as a 5'7", 275-pound white Hispanic male with brown eyes and black hair. And Andrew was described as a 1-week-old baby who was bald with black eyes. And he was also a white Hispanic male. Given that Ernesto had killed these 3 women, there was also a chance he had killed Andrew. So while people were also looking for Ernesto all around South Florida, hoping to see signs of his van, police also began searching the property that the house sat on. Given that the house sat on a 4-acre lot, they were aware that there were many places where Ernesto could be hiding with Andrew, or that Andrew himself could have been hidden from police. But on the morning of January 29, 2020, a call would come into Pasco County Police. A man driving by had seen the van he believed to be part of the Amber Alert, parked on the side of Jessamine Road in Blanton, Florida, which is just north of Tampa. It was sitting off and unoccupied next to a patch of woods. And though this was over 300 miles away from where Ernesto and Andrew had last been seen, police immediately responded to this call. A Pasco County police sergeant arrived on scene and was able to immediately identify this as the white van that Ernesto had been driving. They found neither Ernesto or Andrew inside the van. The van was in park and it was turned off, and inside they would find old receipts and a baby's pacifier, but there was no car seat. After more officers arrived on scene, police branched out and began looking for Ernesto and Andrew in this area. And about 50 yards away from the van, searchers would find Ernesto Caballeiro dead of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. This wound had been inflicted using the same rifle that had shot Arlety, Isabel, and Lina about 2 days before. What was glaringly obvious, though, was that Andrew was not with his father, and the already large search would be launched to a full-scale search to try to find baby Andrew. Searchers would include law enforcement officers and other personnel and volunteers. Given Andrew's young age, searches would not stop. It was a chilly and windy night, so instead of stopping for the evening, a local utility company brought out large lights for the searchers so they could continue combing the area, looking for this baby who couldn't survive on his own. Off-road vehicles, searchers on horses, and even bloodhounds would be brought in to search for Andrew. The bloodhound handlers would use Andrew's pacifier to try to get a scent for him, but the bloodhounds would never actually react to his scent in the area, so it either didn't give them enough scent or Andrew had never been in the area where his father had killed himself. Really, as the searches continued, there was absolutely no sign of baby Andrew anywhere near this area. On the same day, a tip would come in that suggested that a blonde woman had been seen in the passenger seat of the van with Ernesto. Investigators would immediately share this information even before completing a composite sketch because they wanted everyone to be on the lookout for this woman. At a news conference near the search site on January 29th, Pasco County's Sheriff Chris Noco said, "I sit here and pray to God that it is true that she has the baby." They shared this information, and their plan was to continue working with the witness who had seen this woman to create a composite sketch of what she might look like. And additionally, in this press conference, Chris Noco made it very clear that they didn't want to press charges against the woman. They just wanted to know that baby Andrew was safe and they wanted him back with his family. She wouldn't be in trouble and they appreciated her taking care of him during this time, but really his family just wanted him back. Investigators also stated that their main focus would be on continuing the search in South Florida closer to the Caballero home, because that's where most of the most promising leads were at the time. In that area, helicopters could be seen flying all over, there were search dogs, and even canals were being dredged. But they would also continue searching Blanton, where Ernesto had been found. Really, there was this suspicion that Andrew could have been dropped off somewhere, so part of their focus too would be trying to track down the route that Ernesto had taken between the Miami-Dade area up to the Pasco County area, because that is a lot of distance to cover and there are several ways you can get there. So really they were thinking, where could he have left Andrew, and could he have given Andrew to somebody, and hoping that if they could identify the path that he took whenever he drove from South Florida up to more Central Florida, they could figure out what was going on. They were also hoping that they would be able to find out why he'd chosen Blanton to end his life, because he didn't seem to have any apparent connection to the area. So they were hoping that maybe there was some sort of underground adoption scheme cooked up that they could possibly identify. And maybe that's why Ernesto came to this area, so he could hand off Andrew before ending his life. But really, they needed to start with identifying the path Ernesto had taken and if he had any possible connections to people in the area. What confused them even more about the area of Blanton and made them think that there was some sort of plan that Ernesto had in mind was that he still had half a tank of diesel gas left in his van. So he could have gotten a lot further had he had a full tank when he left South Florida. Or that brought up the question of, did he have to stop along the way somewhere and fill up? And could that have been a handoff area or an area where, he got rid of Andrew? So all of these were things that they were pursuing and hoping to be able to understand so that they knew what happened to Andrew. They felt that he didn't just take his life because he felt cornered and stranded, but rather this Blanton area was chosen for a specific reason. Police would continue sharing pictures of Ernesto's van. They wanted anyone who had seen it in the previous few days, approximately 36 hours, to contact them. They believed Arlety, Isabel, and Lina were killed approximately 24 hours before they were found, so that would have been on January 27th, a day before their bodies were discovered, and the Amber Alert was sent out for baby Andrew. And it was also believed that Ernesto had killed himself on January 28th. So family had told police what they should have expected to find in the van, and one thing they mentioned was a pickaxe, which I admit made my true crime watching heart stop. But it really appears that they've never found this pickaxe. There doesn't seem to be any relationship to the pickaxe to any of these crimes, so it's just something that wasn't in the van that they have never found. But what they did find in the van were some old receipts that were actually from before the murders, so these receipts were completely unhelpful in showing if Ernesto had stopped somewhere, if he'd gotten food, if he'd gotten gas, nothing related to these past few days. And as early as January 29th, a clearer picture of what may have happened began to emerge. Family shared that Ernesto Caballeiro was a troubled man. Around this time, his mother had passed away, and he and Arlety were having continuous problems in their marriage. Additionally, Ernesto already had a criminal history. He'd been arrested numerous times with charges like grand theft, running a chop shop, which, if you don't know what that is, it's where you take stolen cars and literally kind of chop them up, tear them apart, and then sell the car parts separately so that the stolen car can't be traced afterwards. And also charges like aggravated assault. Though we don't know exactly what sparked the attack, a family member, Melchor Izquierdo, told Local 10 News, "I don't expect any kind of generosity from him, including with his own son. You're dealing with a very sick, probably very crazy individual." The 3 women in the home died from protecting Andrew that day, and that's really all we know for sure. Almost all of the information regarding this case is more focused on the search for Andrew, which I think is the right thing. I truly think that's what Arlety, Isabel, and Lina would have wanted because they did give their life to try to protect Andrew. I think they would have wanted his name everywhere and in front of everyone, with all of the focus on finding him and not so much on them. But unfortunately, that means I can't tell you that much about them aside from the fact that they were very obviously strong and loving women who loved Andrew and their other children. What we do know about them is that Lina was Isabel's mother and Isabel was Arlety's mother. So they were all Andrew's mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother who gave their lives to protect him. And I think that they would be glad that all of the coverage was on him, really. And I think the fact that they died protecting Andrew from Ernesto shows how loving and amazing they were. But back in the timeline, on only January 30th, a day after this original tip came in, police would announce that Andrew would not be found with the blonde woman. She wasn't a suspect, and as a matter of fact, she wasn't involved at all. They didn't even think that she knew Ernesto or had been in the passenger seat of the car. Rather, it seemed like she'd appeared several hours after Ernesto had already committed suicide, and rather had been a good Samaritan stopping to check on the car and see if the driver needed any help, rather than a co-conspirator or possible person who had Andrew. And of course, this gutted all of those who loved Andrew and were searching for him. There had been hope that this innocent little infant who literally couldn't hold his own head up could have been with someone who was caring for him. Even if, she wasn't his family, she could have been someone who, Ernesto had been having an affair with and who would love Andrew and take care of him, or someone who would at least have him and be able to hand him off to people who could care for him. That had given them hope that Andrew would come back to them, and that hope was immediately dashed when they realized that she had nothing to do with any of this. There had been hope that this now 9-day-old baby had been in someone's care, but now he could be anywhere, possibly with somebody totally unknown, possibly alone and struggling somewhere, or possibly already dead. At this point, police had also been able to map out the possible path that Ernesto had taken. The most likely path showed him traveling up the west side of the state of Florida. They believed he drove straight through, taking about 4.5 hours to arrive at the location where he would end his life. The area where his car was parked was about 3 miles off of Interstate 75. And with this path in mind, and given that there was no trace beyond the pacifier that Andrew was in the car, police began to very much suspect that Andrew had never made it to Pasco County that day. They would now offer an $8,000 reward for any information that would lead them to finding Andrew. And investigators felt that the most promising leads were still in the Miami-Dade area, so they would begin focusing their searches in South Florida rather than in Central Florida. The FBI would also join the search at this time, helping to add to the efforts. The aunt of Arlety and great-aunt of Andrew, Lina Valdes, would make the plea, "I ask the entire country to please come forward if you have the baby. All we want is for the baby to be with us. The family promises that they won't press charges against that person." Also during this time, the family had been working with local government to get an emergency visa for their family member, Humberto Valdes. They wanted him to be able to travel to Florida to be able to attend the funerals of Arlety, Lina, and Isabel, because he was Isabel's brother, Arlety's uncle, and Lina's son. Luckily, he was granted the right to travel to the U.S. for these funerals, and he would later say, "This is the duty that as a son, brother, and uncle I've been given, and that's exactly why we're here, to give our family an honorable burial." And I just can't imagine what the family was going through at this time. They were having to put as much focus as they possibly could into searching for Andrew, while also grieving 3 generations of women being wiped out of their lives. They were trying to mourn the loss of their loved ones while not giving up hope that Andrew would be found. And really, in one single decision made by a troubled and frankly evil man, they lost 4 people they loved. The family friend Melchor Izquierdo would share that the only good thing about that day was that Arlety's 9-year-old daughter and sister to baby Andrew was not in the home, so she had been spared from the attack, and the family still had her. All too quickly, though, police began to believe that Ernesto had, rather than giving the baby to somebody else, had killed Andrew in private and buried him in a place that only he would know about. Then he went and killed himself, so he took this knowledge to the grave with him. And with this knowledge, police were searching fields, the sides of highways and waterways. They heavily searched a stretch of Interstate 29 in the Big Cypress Reserve area. They also launched a search in the Everglades, which are below the route Ernesto had taken up to Pasco County, hoping to find a sign of Andrew. Given Andrew's young age, they knew in searching these areas they were looking for a body or a burial site just to give the family answers. Because unless Andrew had been handed off to somebody else who could care for him, he was way too young to be able to survive on his own for any length of time. The family also hired private investigator Fernando Alvarez to assist in the search for Andrew. He was with the nonprofit the Missing Children Global Network and worked with volunteers to assist in the search for Andrew and tried to discover if there was someone Ernesto may have given Andrew to. Crews spent weeks searching Collier County for any sign of baby Andrew or where he may have been buried. They even searched forests and swamps along the Tamiami Trail. Unfortunately, though, by mid-February, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement had to call off all active searches for baby Andrew. It wasn't that they didn't want to look, it was that they had looked very extensively and there was nowhere else they could search for him without leads. Miami-Dade detective Alvaro Zabaleta would tell the Tampa Bay Times, "Unless something comes in that leads them in another direction, it has to be lead-driven. Right now, we're not looking anywhere." And he continued, "Of course, we're hoping that somebody does have him, and the reason he doesn't come forward is fear." Fernando and his volunteers would take over the search efforts after police had been forced to call off their searches. "That's what the family wants," he would say. "They want closure, just to know what happens." Fernando shared that he had talked to family and friends in his investigation, as well as reviewed footage of the suspected highways that they believed Ernesto to have taken that day. And though this was a 220-mile stretch of highway, they did all they could to search for him on the side of these roads. As they continued their search efforts, they made sure to document anything and everything that could be even slightly related to Ernesto or Andrew, in the hopes that the family could identify something that would help lead them in the right direction. But nothing that they ever collected or documented could be identified by the family as being specifically related to Andrew. And it was at this point that Andrew's family realized that it was very likely they'd never get to know what happened to him. And they turned their focus to caring for and loving the 9-year-old girl whose life had been spared in this awful tragedy. I'm sure she needed all of the love and attention she could possibly get from those around her at this time. I mean, the poor thing lost her mother, her grandmother, her great-grandmother, and her father, and her brother in the same day, so I can't imagine what she has gone through, and my heart just goes out to her. I hope that she has been able to heal some since then and be loved by her family. But that was what the family chose to do at this time. It wasn't that they didn't want to search for Andrew or didn't want to hope that they could find him one day, but rather she was there and needed their love and attention, so that's where they turned their focus. And on April 1st, 2020, Jessica Liscombe of Miami New Times shared that John Walsh covered Andrew's story on his show In Pursuit with John Walsh. And of course, this is absolute great coverage for Andrew's case, but I did just want to mention that I have not seen this information anywhere else, and I literally cannot find evidence of it on the internet. I went to Investigation Discovery, which is the channel that hosts In Pursuit with John Walsh. I did everything I could to try to find that information and couldn't, but I'm sure that this coverage did happen, and I think it's absolutely great that he highlighted Andrew's case because, you know, especially in April, that's not that far after the end of January. It's only been a couple months, so covering it so quickly afterwards, giving out any information and roads that people could have been on at the same time as Ernesto could have been really helpful in helping to identify information to help find Andrew. But though tips came in, nothing led anywhere. And a year after the attacks, on January 28th, 2021, the PI, Fernando Alvarez, would say in an interview with Wink News, "At this point, the disappearance of baby Andrew is a cold case. We want to give closure to the case and find baby Andrew so he can be buried along with his mother, but it's not happening." And unfortunately, because everyone involved in the incident on that day is either dead or missing and presumed dead, we have never really known exactly what happened that day. And honestly, we never will, because even if by some miracle Andrew is found alive one day and being taken care of by somebody, he was only 6 days old when this happened, so he will never know what happened. And if he is alive, thank God for that, because I can't imagine how traumatic it would be to see 3 of your loved family members killed. So if he is out there, I am very grateful that he will never remember what happened. The story that we know has mostly stayed the same since the early days after the 3 women were found dead and the search for Andrew began, just with some different details filled in along the way. It was known that there were a lot of issues in the relationship between Arlety and Ernesto. He was what seemed to be a mean man going through a lot at the time, between losing his mother and now, with an infant just recently born, facing losing his wife and custody of his children. And instead of being a man about it and seeking help or trying to talk out what is going on and work something out with Arlety, he, in a senseless act of domestic violence, brought a rifle to that house that day. The stories say that the 3 women were killed in defense of Andrew, and I absolutely think that is true. I have no doubt they put themselves between him and that baby. But I also think that Ernesto had every intention of killing Arlety that day, at the very least, because he walked into that house with a high-powered rifle. So I don't think this was ever supposed to be a peaceful resolution. Maybe he just intended to threaten them, and then they refused to give over the baby. And after that, he killed them and took Andrew. Fernando Alvarez has shared that it was very likely in Ernesto's head that day that either he would raise that baby or no one would, because he was known as a very possessive man. They also believe that he intended to kill himself that day, and that it wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision where he felt backed into a corner or later realized what he did and panicked and committed suicide. Rather, he intentionally went to the house, killed these 3 women, took Andrew, killed him and buried him somewhere privately, so that only he knew where he was, to further hurt Arlety and her family, who would have gladly taken Andrew and taken care of him. Rather, it was an act of possession that Andrew was his son and no one else would be allowed to raise him. And he would take the knowledge of where Andrew was to his grave with him when he committed suicide. Fernando would further share that Caballero took many roads that doesn't have any cameras, doesn't have any tolls. So that's why we think he knew what he was doing. He planned it all. He had in his mind what he had to do and did it. Now, over 2 years later, Andrew or any sign of him has not been found. No one in the family or in law enforcement knows where he could possibly be. Poor baby Andrew was likely only 6 days old when we believed he was kidnapped, and probably didn't live past 7 days old at the oldest. He literally had his entire life ahead of him. And Arlety, Isabel, and Lina lost their lives protecting baby Andrew from Ernesto. They loved him and, They loved him until the very last moment and did not let Ernesto take him. And I cannot say enough about what incredible women they are and what incredible mothers they all were. I unfortunately don't know very much about them, but I think that that is something that we can all agree on, that those 3 women are absolutely amazing, and they did everything they could to protect Andrew that day. As I said, all of the news coverage at this time was about Andrew and the search for him, so I really can't tell you much about who they were or what they were like, but I think that's what they would have wanted, that Andrew was the focus and that people were looking for him, either to find him and bring him back to his family or to find him and give them closure so he could also be buried with his mother. They would have wanted his face everywhere, and I can at least say that it was all over Florida at the time, and it is still on the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's website. In fact, the Amber Alert for him has never been revoked because he hasn't been found to this day. But even though I don't have a lot of information for you, I wanted to share the story of Arlety, Lina, Isabel, and Andrew. These 4 lives were cut short way too early, all because Ernesto very likely thought of Arlety and especially Andrew as possessions. He didn't want to lose what he considered his, and it had nothing to do with loving Andrew or wanting to give him the best life possible. Because if that was what he really wanted, even in the worst of his troubled emotions, he would focus on trying to co-parent with Arlety rather than taking her away from her son and killing him in the end. But at least we can say that Andrew's sister's life was spared, and she is now being raised by her loving family after this tragedy. I know it's a total long shot, but I want to share the information with you in case anybody knows something or remembers something from this time, of who to contact and give that information to. So if you have any information or may know something, please contact the Florida Department of Law Enforcement or the Miami-Dade Police Department at 305-471-2400. Additionally, you can contact the Missing Children Global Network at 1-855-482-5378 or email them at info@missingchildrenusa.org. Thank you so much for joining me as we talked about Andrew and Arlety and Lina and Isabel today, because I know this was a hard one. Obviously, I started crying while recording, which I honestly didn't really think would happen, but cases like this that are really hard are still important to talk about. Cases like this that don't necessarily have a lot of information are still really important to talk about because, you know, there's a very, very minor chance that Andrew is still out there somewhere. But the truly sad thing is that they've never been able to find Andrew and put him to rest. So I think that it's still important to share his story. And if anybody who may have known Ernesto might know of a special location that was his, that he really enjoyed or that he felt was important to him, or that he liked to go a lot, you know, if you know something like that, that's the kind of information police would be looking for to try to find Andrew, because I think most of us can agree that it's very likely that Andrew was killed before Ernesto committed suicide. And so it's important that we try to find him to give the family closure, more so than trying to find him because he's still out there somewhere. I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts on the case in the comments down below. And also, if you have any suggestions for future cases, you can also leave them in the comments below. And if you would like to be notified when my next video goes up, be sure to hit that subscribe button so it pops up on your feed as soon as my next video is posted. And finally, I just want to say thank you so much for being here with me today and for listening to Andrew's story and the story of these three amazing women who tried to protect him until the very last minute. Please stay safe out there, and I will see you next time. Bye.